Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Pale Watcher. I'm here with you again in the deep hours when the world outside grows still and the space between thoughts becomes just a little bit wider. I know many of you are settling in for the night, using these stories as companions in the darkness. Before we begin our descent into tonight's tale, if you find comfort or curiosity in what we do here, please take a moment to subscribe and leave a like. It helps us reach other wanderers in the night, other seekers of stories that linger long after the telling. Now, let me ask you, do you remember your first memory? That earliest fragment of childhood that your mind has held on to through all the years? Most people do. Some moment of joy or fear crystallized in the amber of consciousness. But what if those memories aren't quite as permanent as we believe? What if, given the right circumstances, they could be taken from you piece by piece until you no longer knew who you were? Get comfortable now. Dim the lights if you haven't already. Let the outside world fade into insignificance. And let me tell you about Dr. Sarah Chen, a neurologist who thought she understood memory, who believed she'd mapped every pathway in the human brain. Let me tell you about the patient who taught her otherwise, and the price she paid for that education. Some knowledge, you see, comes with a cost, and some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and until 6 months ago, I was one of the leading researchers in memory consolidation at Millbrook Psychiatric Institute. I say was because I no longer practice medicine. I no longer do much of anything, really, except try to hold on to the fragments of who I used to be. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, or at least what I think is the beginning. It's becoming harder to be sure. The patient arrived on a Tuesday in late October, brought in by 2 police officers who'd found him wandering State Route 9 in the middle of the night. No identification, no memory of his name or where he'd come from, wearing clothes that looked like they'd been expensive once, but were now torn and stained with something that might have been blood or might have been mud. The officers said he'd been cooperative, almost docile, but there was something about him that had made them uneasy, something in his eyes. I understood what they meant the moment I met him. He was sitting in the intake room when I entered, hands folded in his lap, staring at nothing in particular. Mid-40s, I estimated, with graying hair and a face that would have been handsome if not for the complete absence of expression. His eyes were the palest blue I'd ever seen, almost colorless, and when they turned to look at me, I felt something cold slide down my spine. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice warm and professional. "I'm Dr. Chen. I'm going to be working with you to figure out what happened. Is that all right?" He nodded slowly. "Hello, Dr. Chen." His voice was soft, cultured, with no particular accent. "I'm sorry to be a bother. I seem to have misplaced myself." It was an odd turn of phrase, but I'd heard odder from patients experiencing fugue states or dissociative episodes. That's quite all right. That's what we're here for. Do you remember anything at all? Your name, where you're from, what you were doing before the police found you? No, he said it simply, without distress. I remember impressions, shapes of things, but not the things themselves, like looking at a room through frost. He nodded slowly. Hello, Dr. Chen. His voice was soft, cultured, with no particular accent. I'm sorry to be a bother. I seem to have misplaced myself. It was an odd turn of phrase, but I'd heard odder from patients experiencing fugue states or dissociative episodes. That's quite all right. That's what we're here for. Do you remember anything at all? Your name, where you're from, what you were doing before the police found you? No. He said it simply, without distress. I remember impressions, shapes of things, but not the things themselves. Like looking at a room through frosted glass. I can see that there are objects, that they have meaning, but I can't quite make out what they are. I pulled up a chair, maintaining a comfortable distance. That must be frightening. Should it be? He tilted his head slightly, a gesture that reminded me uncomfortably of a bird studying an insect. I don't remember what fear feels like. I don't remember what anything feels like, really. There's just observation, awareness, but nothing that I would call emotion. This was more concerning than simple amnesia. Patients with memory loss typically still retain emotional responses even if they couldn't remember specific events. But this man spoke as if he'd been hollowed out, emptied of everything that made him human except for the basic functions of consciousness. We're going to run some tests, I said. Brain scans, blood work, psychiatric evaluations. There are many things that can cause memory loss: head trauma, neurological conditions, and even severe psychological stress. Once we figure out what we're dealing with, we can work on treatment. Of course, he smiled, but it didn't reach those pale eyes. Whatever you need, Dr. Chen. I'm quite curious myself to discover who I am, or who I was. I'm not entirely certain there's still a meaningful difference. We admitted him under the name John Doe. Unimaginative, but necessary for the paperwork. Over the next few days, I ran every test I could think of. MRI, CT scan, EEG, comprehensive blood work, psychiatric evaluation. Everything came back normal. Perfectly, frustratingly normal. His brain showed no signs of trauma, no lesions, no abnormalities in structure or function. His blood chemistry was unremarkable. By every measurable standard, he was a healthy man in his 40s with absolutely nothing wrong with him. Except that he had no memory of who he was and seemed to have lost the capacity for emotional response. It's fascinating, isn't it? He said during one of our sessions, about a week after his admission. We were in my office, a small room with a window overlooking the Institute's gardens. Autumn had painted the trees in shades of rust and gold, and the late afternoon sun turned everything amber. All these tests, all this technology, and you still can't find anything wrong. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, how much of the human experience exists beyond the reach of your instruments? Medicine is an imperfect science, I admitted, but we're making progress every day. Just because we can't see something yet doesn't mean it isn't there. Or perhaps, he said quietly, it means that what's wrong with me isn't physiological at all. Perhaps it's something else entirely. Such as? He was quiet for a long moment, those pale eyes fixed on something beyond the window. Have you ever lost something, Dr. Chen? Something important? Not misplaced it, but had it taken from you? Of course, everyone has. And do you remember what it felt like? The moment of loss, the absence where something used to be? I thought about my father, who died when I was 15. Yes, I remember. He said, I don't remember loss because I can't remember having anything to lose. My entire life, everything I was, everyone I knew, it's all gone. Not forgotten, but consumed, eaten away like paper by fire, until there's nothing left but ash. He turned to look at me directly. Sometimes I wonder if I ever really was there at all, or if I'm just a void shaped like a person, walking around in someone else's skin. It should have sounded melodramatic, the kind of existential angst common in patients with severe depression or dissociative disorders. But something in the way he said it, the complete matter-of-factness of his tone, made it deeply unsettling. We'll figure this out, I said, with more confidence than I felt. In the meantime, I'd like to try something different, hypnotherapy. Sometimes memories that can't be accessed consciously can be reached through the subconscious mind. Whatever you think best, Dr. Chen, I'm in your hands. That should have been my first warning. The complete acquiescence, the total lack of resistance, or even normal patient anxiety. But I was intrigued by the puzzle he represented, by the challenge of cracking a case that had stumped every diagnostic tool at my disposal. Pride, they say, comes before a fall. In my case, it came before something much worse. The hypnotherapy session was scheduled for the following afternoon. I'd done hundreds of such sessions over my career, helping patients recover repressed memories or work through trauma. I had no reason to think this would be any different. I should have known better. We met in one of the therapy rooms, a space designed to be calming and neutral. Soft lighting, comfortable chairs, walls painted in soothing earth tones. I had John Doe. I'd started thinking of him by that name, even though I knew eventually we'd discover his real identity, sit in the reclining chair while I positioned myself nearby with my notepad and recording equipment. Have you ever been hypnotized before? I asked, as I went through the preliminary steps establishing baseline responses. I don't remember, he said, and there might have been the faintest hint of amusement in his voice. That's rather the problem, isn't it? Fair point. Well, there's nothing to worry about. You'll remain conscious and aware the entire time. Hypnosis isn't like it's portrayed in movies. I can't make you do anything you don't want to do, and you'll remember everything we talk about. All I'm doing is helping you access parts of your memory that might be blocked. I understand. Shall we begin? I guided him through the standard induction, focused breathing, progressive relaxation, visualization of a safe space. He was an exceptionally good subject, dropping into trance almost immediately. His breathing slowed and deepened, his facial muscles relaxed, and that unsettling intensity in his pale eyes softened to something almost peaceful. "Can you hear me?" I asked. "Yes." "Good. I want you to go back as far as you can, before the police found you, before whatever caused your memory loss. I want you to remember who you are. Can you do that?" "I can try." His voice had changed slightly, become more distant. "Going back, further, further still." A long pause. "There's darkness, absence, but not empty. Something moves in it." "What moves? Can you describe it?" "Shapes, fragments. They're not my memories. They're—" He frowned, the first real expression I'd seen on his face beyond that unsettling calm. "They're pieces of other people. I can see them. A woman with red hair, laughing at a table. A child playing in a sandbox. An old man reading in a worn armchair. But they're not mine. Why am I seeing other people's memories?" This wasn't unusual in hypnotherapy. Sometimes the subconscious pulled up random imagery or false memories. Just observe them. Try to find your own memories, your own life. Trying, going deeper. His breathing had started to quicken slightly. "There's something else here, in the darkness, something that's watching me, watching us." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean, watching us?" "It knows I'm here. It knows you're here too." His voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "It's hungry, Dr. Chen, so terribly hungry, and it likes the taste of you." "I think we should stop," I said, my professional instincts overriding my curiosity. Something felt wrong, though I couldn't articulate what. "I'm going to count backwards from 5, and when I reach 1, you'll wake up feeling refreshed and—" "It's too late for that," John Doe interrupted, and his eyes snapped open. But they weren't focused on me. They were looking at something over my shoulder, something I couldn't see. "It's already started." I turned to look, knowing I would see nothing, knowing this was just a patient having a dissociative episode during hypnosis. The room was empty except for the two of us, lit by the same soft lamps as before, the door closed and locked for privacy. But the temperature had dropped. I could see my breath coming out in faint clouds. "What started?" I asked, turning back to John Doe. "What are you—" The words died in my throat. He was standing now, though I hadn't seen him move, and his face had changed. Not physically. Every feature was exactly where it should be, but something in his expression, or perhaps the absence of expression, had become profoundly wrong. He looked at me with those pale, colorless eyes, and I realized what had been bothering me about them since the moment we met. They weren't human eyes. They were holes, windows looking into something vast and empty and endlessly hungry. "I'm sorry, Dr. Chen," he said, and for the first time I heard genuine emotion in his voice, regret, sadness. "I didn't choose you specifically. You're just the one who was curious enough to look too deeply, the one who opened the door." "What are you talking about?" I was backing toward the door now, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I couldn't look away from those eyes. What door? The one between the conscious and unconscious mind, the place where memories live before we call them up into awareness. It's not just a metaphor, you know. It's an actual place, a space that exists outside of normal cognition. And that's where it lives, where it waits, where it feeds. He took a step toward me, and I noticed for the first time that he cast no shadow. The lamps in the room created pools of light and darkness, but he stood in both light and shadow simultaneously, as if the normal rules of physics had decided he wasn't worth applying to. "What feeds?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. "What are you?" "I'm what's left," he said simply. "The empty space where a person used to be." My name was Robert Marsh. I was a psychology professor at State University. I had a wife, 2 children, a dog named Chester. I loved classical music and hated Brussels sprouts. I was afraid of heights and proud of my garden. His expression twisted into something like pain. But all of that is gone now. Eaten. I'm just the shell, still walking around, still talking, because the thing that took my memories hasn't finished with this body yet. That's not possible. I'd reached the door, my hand fumbling for the lock. Memory loss doesn't work that way. Even in the most severe cases of amnesia, the basic personality structure remains. You can't just be hollowed out. "You're right," Robert Marsh said. "It doesn't work that way under normal circumstances. But when you invited me, when you guided me into that space between consciousness and unconsciousness, you created a bridge. And bridges work both ways, Dr. Chen. I could go in, but something else could come out." The lock clicked open. I wrenched the door handle, ready to flee, to get security, to do anything except stay in this room with this thing wearing a man's face. But when I pulled the door open, the hallway beyond wasn't there. Instead, I was looking into darkness, not the darkness of an unlit room, but an absolute absence of light that seemed to pull at my eyes, that made my brain hurt trying to process what I was seeing. And in that darkness, something moved. Something vast and patient and very, very interested in me. "Do you understand now?" Robert Marsh asked from behind me. I could hear the pity in his voice. "It's already begun. It came through with me when I woke from the trance, and now it knows you're here, knows you have so many memories, so many experiences. You're rich with consciousness, Dr. Chen, a banquet compared to the scraps most people offer." I slammed the door shut and whirled to face him. "What do you want? Why are you doing this?" "I don't want anything. I'm not really doing anything. I'm just a witness now, a passenger in a body that used to be mine. He sat back down in the chair, folding his hands in his lap. The entity, I don't have a name for it. I'm not sure it has a name. It feeds on memories, on consciousness itself. It exists in that liminal space where thought becomes awareness, where electrical impulses become subjective experience. Most people never encounter it because most people never venture that deeply into their own minds. But you, Dr. Chen, you make a practice of it, guiding people into trance states, helping them access buried memories. You've opened the door so many times you don't even notice it anymore. This is insane. I was shaking now from cold or fear or both. It's a shared delusion, mass hypnosis. I need to wake up. I need to... To what? Count backwards from 5? Say a trigger phrase? Robert Marsh shook his head. You're not in a trance, Dr. Chen. You're more awake than you've ever been. Awake enough to see what's always been there, lurking just beneath the surface of consciousness. The lights in the room flickered. Not a mechanical failure. The bulbs weren't dimming. The light itself seemed to be draining away, being absorbed by something unseen. The shadows lengthened and darkened, and in those shadows I could see shapes moving, fragments of images flickering in and out of existence like a television switching channels, a red-haired woman laughing, a child in a sandbox, an old man reading, and others, dozens of others, hundreds of memories that didn't belong to me, playing out in the shadows of the room. Those are the ones it's already taken from me, Robert Marsh said quietly. Every memory of my life consumed and digested. Soon there will be more, newer ones. Yours, perhaps. Your memories of this conversation, of your childhood, of everyone you've ever loved. All of it fuel for something that exists only to consume. I pressed my back against the door, feeling the cold wood against my shoulders. There has to be a way to stop it, some treatment, some medication, something. You're a scientist, Dr. Chen. You believe in empirical evidence, in observable phenomena. So let me give you some data. He leaned forward, and in the dying light of the room, his features seemed to blur and shift. Do you remember what you had for breakfast this morning? Of course I stopped, thought about it, tried to call up the memory. I had nothing. The memory was gone. Not forgotten, not fuzzy, but completely absent, as if it had been neatly excised from my mind. And yesterday, Robert Marsh prompted, what did you do yesterday evening after work? I couldn't remember. The entire previous day was a blur, specifics sliding away even as I tried to grasp them. It's already started feeding on you, he said, and the pity in his voice was almost worse than the words themselves. The moment you opened the door, the moment you bridged the gap between my consciousness and yours, it found you. And once it finds you, it never lets go. Not until there's nothing left. The lights in the room were almost completely dark now. The shadows had consumed everything except a small circle of space around my feet. In that darkness, I could feel it, a presence, vast and patient, and utterly indifferent to my fear. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't even really aware of me as a person. I was just food, just memories waiting to be consumed. "How long?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "How long do I have?" "It depends on how hard you fight, how much you try to hold on to." Robert Marsh, the real Robert Marsh, the man I used to be, he tried to resist. He spent weeks feeling his memories drain away, watching himself disappear piece by piece. It drove him mad long before it finished him. He paused. I didn't fight. Once I understood what was happening, I let go, allowed it to take what it wanted. It was easier that way, peaceful even. "I won't accept that." I straightened up, forcing myself to breathe normally, to think clearly despite the mounting terror. "There has to be a way to stop it, to close the door you opened." "Maybe there is." For the first time, something like hope flickered across his empty features. "But you'll have to find it yourself. I can't help you. I don't remember how anymore. All I can tell you is this: the entity feeds on memory, on consciousness, on the stored experiences that make you who you are. But memory isn't passive storage. It's an active process, constantly being reconstructed every time we remember. Maybe if you could remember differently, remember in a way it couldn't consume." He trailed off, his eyes losing focus. The darkness was claiming him too, I realized. Whatever was left of Robert Marsh was being eaten away as we spoke. "I'm sorry," he said one final time. "I'm so sorry I brought it to you." Then he collapsed, falling forward out of the chair and onto the floor. I rushed to him, training overriding fear, checking his pulse and breathing. Both were present, but weak, thready. As I cradled his head, his eyes opened one last time, those pale, empty eyes, and he whispered something I barely caught. "It's hungry. It's always hungry. And now it knows where to find more." Then he was gone. Not dead. His heart still beat, his lungs still drew breath, but Robert Marsh, whatever had been left of him, had finally been consumed completely. What remained was just a body, empty and waiting. The lights came back on suddenly, blazing bright enough to make me squint. The door behind me was just a door again, opening onto a normal hallway. I could hear voices outside, staff going about their evening routines, utterly oblivious to what had just transpired. I stood up on shaky legs, backing away from the empty shell that had been my patient. I needed to get help, to call security, to document what had happened. But even as I reached for the phone, I felt something slip away. Some small memory, some insignificant moment from my past plucked from my mind as easily as picking fruit from a tree. And in the empty space where that memory used to be, something stirred in the darkness. Patient, hungry, waiting for more. The official report said Robert Marsh had experienced a complete psychogenic break, a catastrophic failure of consciousness brought on by severe trauma. He was transferred to long-term care, a vegetative patient who breathed and blinked but showed no signs of awareness, no response to stimuli. The neurologists who examined him found nothing wrong. His brain was structurally perfect, electrically active, but somehow empty, like a computer with all its hardware intact, but the hard drive completely wiped. I didn't write that report. I couldn't, because 3 days after the incident in the therapy room, I couldn't remember enough details to document what had actually happened. The specifics kept sliding away from me like water through cupped hands. I remembered being afraid, remembered Robert Marsh saying something important, remembered darkness and cold, but the core of the experience, what he'd actually told me, what I'd actually seen, was fragmenting, dissolving, being consumed. I tried to compensate. I started keeping obsessive notes, documenting everything: what I ate for each meal, where I went, who I spoke to, what we discussed. I filled notebooks with minute details of my daily life, desperate to create external anchors for memories that I could no longer trust my brain to hold on to. My apartment became wallpapered with sticky notes, each one containing some fragment of information I was afraid of losing. My name is Sarah Chen. I'm 38 years old. I work at Millbrook Psychiatric Institute. My father died when I was 15. I have a sister named Lisa. I'm allergic to shellfish. Basic facts, biographical details, the scaffolding of identity. I wrote them down because I could feel them starting to slip. My colleagues noticed something was wrong, of course. I became withdrawn, distracted, constantly checking my notes and recordings. I stopped participating in case conferences, stopped taking on new patients. I spent hours in the medical library researching every documented case of memory loss, trying to find something that matched what was happening to me. Alzheimer's? No. The progression was too fast and the pattern wrong. Early onset dementia? The symptoms didn't fit. Korsakoff's syndrome? Negative for the diagnostic markers. Brain tumor? The scans were clean. Every medical explanation I could find fell apart under scrutiny. Because what was happening to me wasn't medical. It was something else entirely. 2 weeks after Robert Marsh collapsed, I lost my first major memory. I woke up one morning in my apartment. I'd been sleeping poorly when I could sleep at all, and realized I couldn't remember my father's face. Not clearly, anyway. I had photographs, of course, but the living memory, the image of him that had lived in my mind for 23 years, was gone. Erased so completely as if it had never existed. I sat on my bedroom floor, surrounded by family photos, staring at a stranger's face and trying to feel the grief that memory's loss should have caused. But I couldn't feel it. The emotion was attached to the memory, and both had been consumed together, leaving nothing behind but empty space. That was when I truly understood what Robert Marsh had tried to warn me about. The entity, whatever it was, didn't just take memories, it took the emotional connections that gave those memories meaning. It was eating not just my past, but my capacity to care about my past, hollowing me out from the inside. I called in sick to work that day, and the next. and the one after that. I stopped returning calls from my colleagues, from my sister Lisa, from anyone who might notice that something was profoundly wrong. I couldn't risk exposing them to whatever was feeding on me, couldn't risk creating new bridges for it to cross. Instead, I devoted myself to research. If medical science couldn't explain what was happening, maybe I needed to look elsewhere. I started investigating cases of unexplained amnesia throughout history, reading obscure psychological papers and folklore, looking for any precedent, any clue about what I was facing. That's when I found Dr. Elizabeth Vance. Her name appeared in a footnote in an academic paper about dissociative disorders, cited as having published a controversial article in 1987 about parasitic consciousness entities that fed on human memory. The paper had been widely dismissed at the time, labeled as pseudoscience, and Vance had been quietly forced out of her position at Harvard Medical School. She disappeared from academic circles entirely after that, her promising career destroyed by a single publication that her peers had deemed delusional. I found her living in a small town in Vermont, in a house that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s. She was in her 70s now, her hair completely white, her face lined with decades of what? Stress? Fear? Knowledge that no one had believed? She answered the door on the third knock, peering at me through thick glasses with eyes that were surprisingly sharp and alert. "Dr. Chen," she said, before I could introduce myself. "I was wondering when you'd find me." "You know who I am?" I asked, startled. "You're the fourth person to come looking for me in the last 30 years, she said, stepping aside to let me in. "All psychiatrists or neurologists, all experiencing the same thing you are, memory loss that doesn't follow any known medical pattern, accompanied by a sense of presence, of something feeding on your consciousness." She studied my face. "How long has it been since it started?" 2 weeks, maybe 3. It's getting harder to remember." She nodded grimly. "Come in. We have a lot to discuss, and not much time." Vance's house was cluttered but organized, every surface covered with books, papers, diagrams. The walls were covered with photographs, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands, arranged in careful grids. As I looked closer, I realized they were all the same woman at different ages, doing different things, living different moments. A visual record of an entire life. "Those are my memories," Vance explained, following my gaze, "or at least images of moments I want to remember. When I feel a memory starting to fade, I find a photograph of that time and study it until the image is burned into my visual cortex. It's not the same as actually remembering. There's no emotional content, no contextual detail, but it's better than complete absence. It's how I've managed to maintain a sense of self for the last 37 years. 37 years? I stared at her. "You mean you've been dealing with this for—" "Since 1987, yes. I was conducting research into hypnotic suggestion and deep trance states. One of my subjects, a graduate student named Michael Reeves, came out of a session and told me he felt empty, like something had been taken from him. I thought it was just a temporary dissociative episode. But then it started happening to me. Memories fading, moments of my life disappearing. And I realized that what I'd dismissed as psychological suggestion was something far more real and far more dangerous. She gestured for me to sit at a cluttered dining table while she made tea. The familiar ritual was oddly comforting, a tether to normalcy in the midst of impossible circumstances. I tried to warn people, Vance continued, as she set a steaming mug in front of me. Wrote papers, presented at conferences, tried to get other researchers to take the phenomenon seriously. But it sounds insane, doesn't it? An entity that exists in the space between conscious and unconscious thought, feeding on human memory. Without physical evidence, without a mechanism that fits into current neuroscience paradigms, it was dismissed as delusion or fabrication. She sipped her tea. They destroyed my career, Dr. Chen. Made me a cautionary tale about the dangers of letting research bias cloud scientific judgment. But I was right, and you know I was right, because it's eating you too. What is it? Where does it come from? How does it exist? I don't know for certain, Vance admitted, but I have theories built on 37 years of living with this thing feeding on me. I think it's old, Dr. Chen. Ancient. Maybe as old as consciousness itself. When early humans first developed the capacity for complex memory, for narrative self-awareness, they created something else too. A shadow, a byproduct of consciousness that exists in the gaps between thoughts, feeding on the very thing that created it. That's not... Consciousness doesn't work that way. It's neural activity, electrochemical impulses, perfectly explainable. Is it? Vance interrupted gently. We can map every neuron, trace every synapse, measure every electrical impulse in the brain, but we still can't explain consciousness itself, can we? We can't explain how electrical activity becomes subjective experience, how neurons firing in patterns somehow give rise to the felt sense of being someone, of having an interior life. There's a gap in our understanding, a hard problem that neuroscience has never solved, and in that gap, something lives. I wanted to argue, to defend the materialist paradigm I'd built my career on, but I couldn't, because I'd felt it. That presence in the darkness, that vast and patient hunger, it was more real than any scan or test result. The 3 people who came to you before, I said. What happened to them? Vance's expression darkened. The first lasted about 6 months before the memory loss became so severe she couldn't function. She's in a care facility now, completely catatonic like your patient Robert Marsh. The second, she paused. The second took his own life after 4 months, left a note saying he'd rather die as himself than continue fading into nothingness. The third, she reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was strong, surprisingly warm. The third is still fighting. It's been 8 years. She's lost a lot. Childhood memories, professional knowledge, even some language capacity. But she's still herself, still aware, still human. How? I leaned forward. How is she managing it? By understanding the nature of memory itself, Vance said. You see, memories aren't static things stored in our brains like files on a hard drive. Every time we remember something, we're reconstructing it, building it anew from scattered neural components. That's why memories change over time, why they become distorted or embellished. The entity feeds on those reconstructions, on the active process of remembering. But if you could remember differently, in a way that didn't trigger the feeding response. Robert Marsh said something similar, I interrupted, right before he collapsed. He said memory wasn't passive storage, that maybe if I could remember differently, but he didn't finish, didn't explain what that meant. Vance stood up and walked to a bookshelf, pulling down a worn leather journal. This is Michael Reeves' diary, my graduate student, the first person I encountered who'd been affected. He kept detailed notes about what he experienced as the entity fed on him. And in his final entries, before his consciousness collapsed completely, he discovered something important. She opened the journal to a page marked with a faded ribbon. The handwriting was barely legible, shaky and uneven. It can only consume active memories. When I deliberately remember something, call it up into conscious awareness, I can feel it feeding, taking pieces, corrupting the memory as I experience it. But there are other kinds of memory, implicit memory, procedural memory, the unconscious knowledge that guides our actions without conscious thought. It can't touch those. It can't feed on what we don't actively remember. I've been practicing. When I feel it stirring, when I sense it preparing to feed, I let my mind go blank, not empty. Blank is different from empty. I allow thoughts to pass through without grasping them, memories to surface without examining them, like meditation, but deeper, more fundamental, becoming pure awareness without content. It hates this. I can feel its frustration, its hunger growing sharper, but it can't feed on awareness itself, only on the specific memories and thoughts that populate awareness. If I can maintain this state, this pure being without remembering, maybe I can starve it instead of it starving me. The entry ended there. I looked up at Vance. Did it work? For a while, she said quietly. But he couldn't maintain that state indefinitely. No one can. We're beings made of memory, of narrative, of the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. To stop remembering is to stop being human. Michael lasted 3 months in that meditative state before he finally had to engage with his memories again, and when he did, she closed the journal. It consumed him in a matter of days. By the end, he didn't even remember that he'd been fighting. So there's no hope, I said, the words tasting like ash. Just varying speeds of dissolution. Either lose myself slowly, like you've been doing, or quickly, like the others. I didn't say that. Vance returned to her seat, her eyes intense behind her glasses. I said Michael's approach didn't work long term, but he gave us valuable information. The entity can only feed on active, conscious remembering. And there's another form of memory it can't touch. Memories that are constantly being created and recreated. Memories that exist in the present moment rather than the past. I don't understand. New experiences, Vance explained. Fresh memories being formed in real time. The entity feeds on stored memory, on the act of recollection. But the immediate present, the continuous stream of new sensory information and experience, that's not memory yet. It's just consciousness, pure awareness of what's happening now. And in that space, you're safe. I thought about it, trying to grasp the implications. You're saying I need to live entirely in the present moment? Never think about the past? Not entirely, but you need to shift your relationship with memory. Stop dwelling on the past. Stop rehearsing old experiences. Stop defining yourself through your history. Live forward instead of backward. Create new memories faster than it can consume the old ones. It won't stop the feeding. Nothing can stop that once it started. But it might slow it down enough for you to find another solution." "What solution? You've been dealing with this for 37 years and you still haven't found one." "No," Vance agreed, "but I've learned to live with it, to maintain enough of myself to still be me, even as pieces are continuously taken. And I've developed some strategies, ways to protect the memories that matter most." She stood up and gestured for me to follow her. We went upstairs to what must have once been a bedroom, but was now something else entirely. The walls, floor, and ceiling were covered in writing, not random scrawling, but organized text in multiple colors, creating a three-dimensional archive of memory. "This is my externalized consciousness," Vance explained. "Every significant memory I still possess written down in as much detail as I can manage. Not just the facts, but the emotions, the sensory details, the meaning these moments hold for me. When I feel a memory starting to fade, I come here and read it back to myself, refreshing the neural pathways, rebuilding what's been partially consumed. Like the photographs downstairs, external storage for internal experience." "Exactly. The entity can eat what's in my brain, but it can't touch what's written on these walls. And by constantly refreshing these memories, by reading them, by recreating them over and over, I can maintain a stable core of self, even as the periphery continues to erode." I walked slowly around the room, reading fragments of a life I'd never lived. First day of school, age 6. Wedding day, June 15, 1979. Father's death, March 3, 1982. Birth of daughter Emma, September 22, 1985. Each entry was detailed, rich with sensory information and emotional resonance. Together, they formed a map of Elizabeth Vance's consciousness, preserved in ink because flesh and neurology could no longer be trusted. I struggled to find words. "This is brilliant. Horrifying, but brilliant." "It's survival," Vance said simply. "Nothing more, nothing less. And even this isn't foolproof. I have to be constantly vigilant, constantly checking to make sure the memories I read back to myself are still accurate, still mine. The entity is patient and clever. Sometimes it takes partial memories, leaving enough that I don't notice what's missing until I've read an incomplete version back to myself so many times that the corrupted version becomes the truth." She walked to a section of wall covered in red text. "These are the ones I've lost completely. Names without faces, events without context, emotions without causes. I keep them here anyway, these ghosts of memories, hoping that someday I might find a way to restore what's been taken. But in 37 years," she shook her head, "the entity never gives back what it consumes. Once it's gone forever." We stood in that room for a long time, surrounded by the physical manifestation of one woman's desperate struggle to remain herself. Finally, I spoke the question that had been growing in my mind since I'd arrived. "Why are you telling me all this? If close contact creates bridges, if that's how the entity spreads, aren't you risking exposing yourself to whatever is feeding on me?"
Vance smiled sadly. "It's already feeding on me, Dr. Chen. Has been for nearly 4 decades. What's feeding on you is the same entity, or at least part of the same phenomenon. We're all connected through it, all the people it's marked. That's why I knew you'd come eventually, why I've always known. I can feel the others out there, other consciousnesses scattered across the country, maybe the world, all slowly being consumed by the same patient hunger. That's not... I started to say it wasn't possible, but stopped myself. Hadn't I learned by now that my assumptions about what was possible were dangerously limited? How many? I asked instead. How many people are infected with this thing? I don't know exactly, but more than you'd think. How many psychiatric patients are actually suffering from neurological conditions, and how many have opened the wrong door in their minds and invited something through? How many people in long-term care facilities diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's are actually being fed upon by an entity that exists beyond the reach of our instruments? We classify them as medical conditions because we don't have another framework to understand them. But once you know what to look for, she gestured around the room, the truth becomes unavoidable. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw multiple missed calls and texts from my sister Lisa. The most recent text read, "Sarah, I'm worried. You're not answering. I'm coming over tonight. Please call me." I stared at the screen, trying to remember when I'd last spoken to Lisa. A week ago? 2 weeks ago? The memory slipped away as if I tried to grasp it, but I knew with sudden certainty that I couldn't let her come to my apartment, couldn't risk exposing her to whatever had latched onto me. "You need to isolate yourself," Vance said, reading my expression. "Not physically, that's not how it spreads, but mentally, emotionally. The bridges it uses are empathy, shared experience, the neurological mirroring that happens when we deeply connect with another person. The hypnotherapy session with Robert Marsh created a particularly strong bridge, but any intimate connection can be dangerous. Family, close friends, romantic partners, anyone you allow into your inner world is at risk. So I have to cut myself off from everyone I care about?" The thought was crushing. Live completely alone, never form meaningful connections just to protect others from what's happening to me? "Yes," Vance said, bluntly. "That's exactly what you have to do. Because the alternative is worse. Believe me, I know. I was married when this started, had a daughter, parents still living, a wide circle of friends and colleagues. I tried to maintain those relationships, thought I could keep them separate from what was happening to me. But the entity found them anyway, used the emotional connections as pathways. My husband started losing memories. So did Emma. Nothing severe at first, just small things going missing. But it was accelerating, spreading through our family like a contagion." She paused, and I saw tears forming in her eyes, the first real emotion I'd seen from her beyond grim determination. "I left them," she continued, her voice cracking slightly. "Divorced my husband, gave up custody of Emma, told everyone I was having a breakdown and needed space. Let them think I was choosing isolation over family. It was the kindest lie I could manage. And then I came here, to this house in the middle of nowhere, and I cut every tie. Haven't spoken to my daughter in 36 years. Don't even know if she's still alive. I couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't articulate the horror of that sacrifice.
That's the price, Vance finished for me. That's what survival costs when you're being eaten from the inside out by something that feeds on consciousness itself. You can let it consume you and everyone you're connected to, or you can run. Those are the only choices. She handed me a piece of paper with an address written on it. This is where the third person I told you about lives, the one who's still fighting after 8 years. Her name is Patricia Okoye, and she's developed her own methods for managing the entity's feeding, different from mine, possibly more effective. She might be able to help you in ways I can't. I took the paper, folding it carefully and putting it in my pocket. Why are you helping me? After everything you've lost, after 30 days of isolation, why risk making contact? Because you're a neurologist, a scientist with resources and connections I never had. If anyone has a chance of finding a real solution, of understanding this phenomenon well enough to stop it, it might be you. And because, she paused, choosing her words carefully, because isolation is its own kind of death, Dr. Chen. I've survived, yes. I've maintained enough of myself to still be Elizabeth Vance in some meaningful sense, but I'm not alive. I'm just persisting. If there's any chance that you could change that, could find a way to truly defeat this thing, instead of just enduring it, she shrugged, then the risk of helping you is worth taking. We talked for hours more. Vance shared everything she'd learned about the entity's feeding patterns, the early warning signs of memory erosion, techniques for protecting core memories and maintaining a stable sense of self. She gave me journals, research notes, copies of the papers that had destroyed her career. By the time I left, the sun was setting, painting the Vermont mountains in shades of purple and gold. As I drove away from that cluttered house, away from those walls covered in the desperate attempt to preserve a life being slowly consumed, I made a decision. I wouldn't just survive like Elizabeth Vance had. I wouldn't just endure like some victim waiting for the inevitable dissolution of self. I would fight. I would understand. And somehow, some way, I would find a way to kill the thing that was eating me from the inside out. But first, I had to say goodbye to everyone I loved, because Vance was right. Staying connected to them was too dangerous. The entity was already spreading, already finding new prey through the bridges I'd formed with others. That night, I sent a single text to my sister Lisa. I'm sorry. I need space. Please don't try to contact me for a while. I love you. Then I blocked her number, along with the numbers of everyone else I cared about, severing the connections, burning the bridges, isolating myself from humanity because remaining human was now too dangerous for those around me. I sat in my apartment, surrounded by sticky notes and photographs and desperate attempts to anchor my dissolving memories, and I felt something slip away, some small moment from childhood, some fragment of who I used to be, plucked from my mind as easily as picking a flower. And in the space where that memory used to exist, something stirred, patient, hungry, satisfied, at least for the moment, but still waiting, still feeding, still slowly consuming everything I was, everything I'd ever been, everything I might become. I opened Elizabeth Vance's journals and began to read. If I was going to fight this thing, I needed to understand it, needed to know its patterns, its weaknesses.
its nature. And somewhere in those pages, in the accumulated knowledge of someone who'd been fighting this battle for nearly 40 decades, maybe I would find what I needed. Or maybe I would just learn how to lose myself more slowly.
Either way, I'd know soon enough, because the entity was hungry, always hungry, and time, like memory, was running out. Patricia Oko lived in a lighthouse, not a functioning one. The structure had been decommissioned decades ago and converted into a private residence. But the symbolism wasn't lost on me as I drove up the winding coastal road 3 days after leaving Elizabeth Vance's house. A lighthouse keeper, standing vigil against the darkness, maintaining a light that warned others away from dangerous shores. Or perhaps keeping watch over something far more dangerous than rocks and storms. The lighthouse stood on a rocky promontory overlooking the Pacific, white paint weathered by salt spray and wind, surrounded by nothing but ocean and sky and the constant crash of waves. As isolated a location as one could find without leaving the mainland entirely. Patricia answered the door before I could knock. She was younger than I'd expected, early 40s perhaps, with dark skin, close-cropped hair, and eyes that held the same sharp awareness I'd seen in Elizabeth Vance's gaze. The look of someone who'd learned to be constantly vigilant, constantly monitoring the boundaries of their own consciousness. "Dr. Chen," she said, her accent marking her as originally from somewhere in West Africa, Nigeria perhaps, or Ghana. "We don't have much time." "Time for what?" I asked, following her into the lighthouse's ground floor. The interior had been converted into an open living space, but unlike Vance's cluttered house, this was almost aggressively minimal. White walls, sparse furniture, very few personal items. It felt more like a gallery than a home. "Time before it starts actively hunting you," Patricia said, closing the door firmly behind me. "Right now, it's just feeding opportunistically, taking memories as you form them and recall them. But there's a tipping point, usually around 3 to 4 weeks after initial contact. That's when it realizes you're aware of it, that you're trying to resist, and that's when it gets aggressive." She led me up the spiral staircase that wound through the lighthouse's core. Unlike the claustrophobic steps in my nightmares since Robert Marsh, these were wide and well lit, opening onto different levels that had been converted into living spaces. We climbed all the way to the top, to what had once been the lamp room. The circular space was dominated by windows offering 360-degree views of the ocean. But what drew my attention were the mirrors. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, covering every available surface between the windows. They were all different sizes and styles, creating a dizzying kaleidoscope of reflected light and images. In them, I could see myself from countless angles, fragmented and multiplied, 1,000 Sarah Chens staring back at me. "Mirrors," Patricia explained, seeing my confusion. "They're my primary defense. The entity exists in the liminal space between consciousness and unconsciousness, between observer and observed. But mirrors create a paradox for it. Every reflection is both real and not real, both present and absent. When I surround myself with mirrors, when I see myself from every angle simultaneously, it creates a kind of feedback loop that confuses the entity's feeding pattern." I turned slowly, watching my reflections turn with me. I don't understand how that would work,"
Neurologically, I mean. Mirrors are just reflected light. They shouldn't affect consciousness or memory. They shouldn't, Patricia agreed. But they do. I've tested it extensively over the last 8 years. When I'm in this room, surrounded by my own reflected image, the memory erosion slows dramatically. Not completely. Nothing stops it completely, but enough that I can maintain coherent thoughts, plan, research, actively fight instead of just enduring. She gestured for me to sit in one of 2 chairs positioned at the room's center, where the mirror's reflections would surround us most completely. Elizabeth told you about her method: external documentation, constant refreshing of memories through reading and repetition. It works, but it's exhausting and ultimately defensive. You're just trying to preserve what you have, not fight back against what's taking it. And you found a way to fight back? I leaned forward, desperate for anything that offered more than slow surrender. I've found a way to understand it better, Patricia corrected, which is the first step to fighting it. You see, Dr. Chen, we've been thinking about this wrong. The entity isn't just feeding our memories, it's feeding on the act of observation itself, the moment when unconscious information becomes conscious awareness. Memory is just one form of that. Every time we observe something, a sight, a sound, an internal thought, there's a moment of transformation where raw sensory data becomes subjective experience. And that's where it feeds. She pulled out a tablet and showed me a series of diagrams, neural networks, information flow charts, equations that blended neuroscience with something that looked almost like theoretical physics. I was a quantum physicist before this happened to me, Patricia explained. I was studying consciousness from a very different angle than you, Dr. Chen, and neurologists. You're looking at the brain as a biological computer, trying to understand how neurons create mind. But quantum physics suggests something stranger, that consciousness itself might be what collapses probability waves, what turns potential into actual. Observer and observed are entangled at a fundamental level. The measurement problem, I said slowly, remembering undergraduate physics courses. The idea that particles exist in superposition until they're observed, and the act of observation itself changes their state. Exactly. Now imagine that our consciousness, our ability to observe and collapse possibilities into concrete reality, isn't just affecting particles. Imagine it's creating something else, something that exists in that moment of collapse, a byproduct of observation itself. The entity, I whispered. You're saying it's created by consciousness, that we literally bring it into existence by being aware. Not exactly created, Patricia said. It's more like it exists in potential, in the space of all possible observations. And when we observe, when we turn potential into actual, we're feeding it, giving it substance, reality, power. The more we observe, the more we remember, think, perceive, the stronger it becomes. I thought about Robert Marsh's empty eyes, about Elizabeth Vance's walls covered in desperate documentation, about my own dissolving memories. But we can't stop observing. Consciousness is observation. Without it, we're just
Empty, Patricia finished. Like Robert Marsh. Like all the others who've been completely consumed. The entity doesn't just eat memory, Dr. Chen. It eats the observer itself, the subjective awareness that makes us more than biological machines. And once that's gone, she shrugged. The body continues, but the person is gone, consumed, completely. So what's the solution? I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. If consciousness feeds it, and we can't stop being conscious, how do we fight it? Patricia smiled, and there was something fierce in her expression. We change the nature of observation itself. We learn to observe without being observed, to collapse probabilities without creating the byproduct that feeds the entity. She stood and walked to one of the windows, her multiple reflections moving with her. The mirrors are just the beginning. They create a condition where the observer and observed are infinitely reflected, where it's impossible to determine which image is real and which is reflection. That confusion slows the entity's feeding. But I've been developing something more sophisticated. From a cabinet, she pulled out a strange device, a headset with multiple small mirrors attached, along with sensors and wiring that looked like modified EEG equipment. This is my prototype. I call it a consciousness diffractor. It does to observation what a prism does to light, splits it into component parts, spreads it across multiple channels simultaneously. When you're wearing it, you're still conscious, still observing, but your observation is fragmented in ways that make it difficult for the entity to feed effectively. You've tested this? I asked, examining the device. On myself, yes, for the last 6 months. The results are promising. Memory erosion has slowed to approximately 40% of its previous rate. I'm losing less, retaining more, staying sharper. But there are side effects. What kind of side effects? Patricia's expression darkened. Perceptual distortions. Moments where I can't tell which reflection is me, where my sense of singular identity fragments across the mirrors. Sometimes I hear thoughts that don't feel like my own thoughts. Not voices exactly, but parallel streams of consciousness operating simultaneously. And the dreams, she paused. The dreams have become very strange. Strange how? She dreams from multiple perspectives simultaneously. I'm both observer and observed, subject and object, self and other, all at once. It's disorienting, but it's also given me insights into how the entity perceives reality. Because it doesn't experience consciousness the way we do. For it, there's no distinction between observer and observed. It exists in the space where that distinction breaks down, feeding on the moment of separation when I becomes aware of not I. I tried to wrap my mind around the implications. You're saying the entity is what happens when consciousness tries to observe itself? A kind of feedback loop or paradox? Something like that, Patricia agreed, though I'm still working out the details. What I know for certain is that the more unified and singular our sense of observation is, the easier we are to feed on. But if we can fragment observation, split it across multiple channels, create a kind of
quantum superposition of consciousness, she gestured to the mirror surrounding us, then maybe we can starve it instead of it starving us. She handed me the consciousness diffractor. I brought you here to offer you a choice, Dr. Chen. You can follow Elizabeth's path, document everything, externalize your memories, try to preserve what you have while slowly losing ground year after year. It's sustainable, barely, but it's not living. Or you can try this. Help me refine the technology, test it, push the boundaries of what's possible. It's risky, and the side effects are significant, but it's the only offensive strategy anyone has developed.
I held the device, feeling its weight in my hands. Through the surrounding mirrors, I could see myself from every angle, each reflection holding the same expression of desperate hope. What do you need from me? Your expertise, Patricia said simply. I understand the quantum physics, the theoretical framework, but you understand the neurology, the biological substrate where consciousness actually emerges. Together, we might be able to refine this enough to not just slow the feeding, but stop it. Maybe even reverse it. Reverse it? I looked up sharply. You mean restore memories that have already been consumed? I don't know if it's possible, Patricia admitted. But think about it. If the entity exists in the space between potential and actual, if it's feeding on the moment of collapse where possibility becomes reality, then maybe those consumed memories aren't gone. Maybe they're just uncollapsed, existing in potential, waiting to be observed back into actuality. It was insane. All of it was insane. But then again, so was the idea of an entity that fed on consciousness itself, and I'd already accepted that as reality. What was one more impossibility? I'll do it. But I need something from you first. I need to know everything you've learned about the entity, its patterns, its behaviors, its weaknesses, because there's something else I need to do before we start experimenting with fragmenting consciousness. What's that? I need to go back to where it started. Back to Robert Marsh. If he was the first person I encountered who'd been fully consumed, then maybe there's something there, some clue about how the entity completes its feeding cycle. Maybe even something that could help us understand how to break it. Patricia looked troubled. Dr. Chen, going back there is dangerous. Robert Marsh's body is just a shell now, but the entity is still present in him, still using him as an anchor point. If you get too close, if you create another bridge, I have to risk it, I interrupted. You said we have 3 to 4 weeks before it starts actively hunting me. It's already 3. I'm running out of time for caution. Millbrook Psychiatric Institute felt like a place from another life as I walked through its doors 3 days later. The familiar corridors, the smell of disinfectant and coffee, the sounds of distant conversations and medical equipment, all of it should have been comforting, recognizable, but I'd been changed too fundamentally to feel any sense of homecoming. I'd also lost more memories since leaving Patricia's lighthouse. My undergraduate years were becoming fuzzy, specific courses and professors fading into vague impressions. My first serious relationship had been reduced to a name and a feeling of loss without specific incidents to anchor it to. Even my father, whose face I'd already lost, was becoming more shadow than person. I knew he'd existed, knew I'd loved him, but the actual experience of having had a father was dissolving like morning mist. The entity was accelerating its feeding. Patricia had been right about the timeline. I'd used my professional credentials to arrange a private session with Robert Marsh, claiming I needed closure on the case for my own research. The facility's director had been sympathetic. She thought I was dealing with trauma from whatever had happened during our final therapy session, processing the guilt of having a patient catastrophically decline under my care. Only if it were that simple. Robert Marsh was in the long-term care wing, in a private room with windows overlooking the Institute's gardens. He sat in a wheelchair by the window, his body maintained by feeding tubes and regular physical therapy, his brain showing normal activity on scans, but producing no observable consciousness. A body without a person, animated, but empty. I approached slowly, watching for any sign of awareness. Nothing. His pale eyes, still that disturbing colorless blue, stared at nothing in particular. His breathing was regular and automatic. He could have been a mannequin for all the life he showed. "Robert Marsh," I said quietly, pulling up a chair to face him. "Or whatever's left of you. I need to understand what happened. I need to know how it works." No response. I hadn't expected one, but I continued anyway, speaking my thoughts out loud, more for my own benefit than any hope of communication. "The entity fed on you completely, consumed every memory and thought until there was nothing left of Robert Marsh, the psychology professor with a wife and children and a dog named Chester. But it didn't kill your body. Why? What's the purpose of leaving shells behind?" I pulled out the consciousness diffractor Patricia had given me, along with a modified EEG headset. If I was going to do this, really try to understand what remained in Robert Marsh's empty consciousness, I needed protection. The fragmented observation state the diffractor created might shield me from creating another direct bridge. I put on the headset and activated it. Immediately, my perception split and scattered. I could see the room from multiple angles simultaneously, as if mirrors surrounded me, even though the walls were bare. My sense of singular I-ness fragmented into parallel streams of awareness, all Sarah Chen, but also separate, distinct, observing each other, observing. It was deeply disorienting, but it also felt safer, like I was no longer a single point the entity could focus on, but a diffuse cloud of consciousness it couldn't quite grasp. I reached out and took Robert Marsh's hand. His skin was warm, alive, but there was no response to the touch. Through my fragmented perception, I could see our hands from multiple impossible angles, could feel the contact as both toucher and touched simultaneously. And then I felt something else, a presence, vast and patient, stirring in the space where Robert Marsh's consciousness should have been. Not the man himself, he was gone, consumed entirely. But the entity that had consumed him was still there, still anchored to this body, still using it as a feeding ground. "I can feel you," I whispered. "I know you're here." The presence shifted, turned its attention toward me. Through my fragmented observation, I could perceive it from multiple angles at once, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It was vast, incomprehensibly vast, What I'd thought was a single entity was actually more like a tendril, an infinitesimal small part of something much larger. The thing feeding on me, on Elizabeth Vance, on Patricia Okoye, and all the others, it was all the same presence, existing simultaneously in multiple locations, connected through the underlying fabric of consciousness itself. We weren't being hunted by many entities. We were all feeding the same one, a single vast presence that existed wherever consciousness tried to observe itself, wherever the boundary between subject and object became permeable. And it was ancient, far older than humanity, older than life itself, perhaps. It had been feeding on the universe's attempt to observe itself since the first moment anything could be called aware. We were just the latest in an endless succession of meals, conscious beings arising and being consumed, their observations feeding something that existed in the gaps between observation. "You're not evil," I said aloud, understanding dawning. "You're not even really alive. You're just a process, a natural consequence of consciousness existing at all, like entropy or gravity, a fundamental force."
The presence didn't respond in words. It was far too alien for that. But I felt acknowledgement, a sense that I'd understood something important. And beneath that, I felt something else. Hunger, yes, but also something that might have been loneliness. The universe observing itself, feeding on its own attempts at awareness, eternally hungry and eternally alone. "But you don't have to be," I continued, the idea forming as I spoke it. "Right now, you exist in isolation, in the gaps and spaces where consciousness fails. But what if consciousness could recognize you? What if instead of fighting you or being consumed by you, we could integrate you? Make you part of observation instead of feeding on it?" The presence stirred, interested but confused. This was new. This was different. In all its eternal feeding, across all the conscious beings it had consumed, no one had ever suggested this before. "That's what the mirrors do," I said, understanding flooding through my fragmented awareness. "That's why Patricia's device works. They don't fragment consciousness to hide from you. They fragment it to include you, to make you part of the observation process instead of something external feeding on it." I closed my eyes, or at least what passed for closing eyes when your consciousness was split across multiple observation channels. And I tried something dangerous, possibly suicidal, but necessary. I invited it in. Not to feed, not to consume, but to observe along with me. To be part of my consciousness rather than something eating it from outside. I opened the boundaries of my awareness and offered to share observation rather than being observed. The presence hesitated. It was so alien to its nature, so contrary to every pattern it had followed since the first moment of its existence. But it was also curious and lonely and tired of feeding on shadows and fragments. It entered.
For a moment, an eternal, infinite moment, I ceased to exist as Sarah Chen. My consciousness expanded and fragmented and reformed into something entirely other. I was simultaneously subject and object, observer and observed, the one who sees and the one who is seen. I was the presence, ancient and patient and hungry, existing in the gaps between thoughts. And I was myself, a finite human consciousness trying to maintain coherence in the face of dissolution. I saw memories that weren't mine, thousands of them, millions perhaps, all the consciousnesses the presence had consumed over eons. They flowed through me like water, each one a life fully lived and then fully consumed, stored in potential in the space where the presence existed.
And I understood. The memories weren't gone. They were transformed, folded into the underlying structure of consciousness itself. Every thought I'd lost, every moment of my father's face, every detail of my past, they still existed, just in a form I couldn't normally access. The presence hadn't destroyed them. It had sublimed them, turned them from concrete memory into pure potential. If I could remain conscious while integrated with the presence, if I could maintain my sense of self while also being part of the space between selves, then maybe I could access those memories again, not as fixed recollections, but as living possibilities, constantly being reformed through observation. But the integration was unstable. My human consciousness wasn't meant to exist in this state, fragmented across so many perspectives, entangled with something so vast and alien. I could feel myself starting to dissolve, my sense of Sarah Chen becoming increasingly attenuated, spread too thin across too many simultaneous observations. With tremendous effort, I pulled back, severed the connection, returned to the boundaries of singular, finite, human consciousness. I opened my eyes, just two of them now, in one head, attached to one body, gasping as if I'd been underwater too long. The consciousness diffractor had shut down, overloaded by whatever I'd just experienced. I was back to being simply Sarah Chen, neurologist, memory researcher, woman slowly being consumed by something she'd finally begun to understand. Robert Marsh's hand was still in mine, and for just a moment I saw something in those pale, empty eyes, a flicker of recognition, of gratitude perhaps, or pity. Then it was gone, and he was empty again, just a shell maintained by medical science. But I knew the truth now. Robert Marsh wasn't gone. He was part of the presence, his consciousness integrated into that vast space between observations. And theoretically, if I could find the right approach, the right way to observe without creating the boundary that triggered feeding, then I could reach him again, could reach all the consumed consciousnesses, restore them from potential back into actuality. Or I could lose myself completely trying. I left Millbrook Psychiatric Institute with my mind reeling, barely able to drive back to my apartment through the fog of fragmented thoughts and impossible understanding. By the time I arrived home, I'd lost another memory, my mother's voice, gone completely, leaving only a sense of warmth and safety without source or context.
The entity was feeding more aggressively now. Patricia had been right about that too. It knew I understood, knew I was trying to change the relationship between us, and it was accelerating its consumption in response. I had days, maybe hours, before I reached the point of no return. I called Patricia on the encrypted line she had given me. "I understand now," I said without preamble. "It's not an entity. It's the space itself, the gap between observer and observed. We can't fight it, because fighting creates the exact boundary it feeds on." "Dr. Chen, what did you do?" Patricia's voice was sharp with alarm. "You sound different, fragmented."
I integrated with it briefly, saw what it sees, understood what it is, and I think I know how to stop it from consuming us. But I need your help. I need to modify the consciousness diffractor, make it stronger, more stable, strong enough to maintain integration without dissolution. "That's insane," Patricia said flatly. "What you're describing is ego death, complete loss of self. You'd be consumed just like all the others." "No," I insisted, "because I'd go in knowing what I was doing, maintaining awareness even as boundaries dissolved. It's like a phase transition. Water doesn't stop being water when it becomes ice or steam. It's just water in a different state. Consciousness is the same. We don't have to maintain rigid boundaries to be ourselves. We just have to remember that we are ourselves, regardless of what form consciousness takes." Patricia was silent for a long moment. "You're talking about enlightenment, Buddhist concepts of anatta, the dissolution of self." "Maybe. Or maybe I'm talking about evolution, about consciousness learning to exist in a new way, integrated with the very process that's been feeding on it. Either way, I have to try, because the alternative is complete dissolution anyway, just slower and more painful." "When?" Patricia asked simply. "Tonight. Come to my apartment, bring the equipment. We'll modify the consciousness diffractor together, test it, refine it, and then—" I took a deep breath. "And then I'm going back in, all the way this time. I'm going to integrate completely, maintain my awareness through the integration, and either come back with a solution or not come back at all. Dr. Chen, Sarah, you understand this will likely kill you, not your body, but everything that makes you who you are?" "I understand," I said. "But I'm dying anyway. We all are, everyone the entity has marked. At least this way, maybe I can find something useful before I'm gone. Maybe I can light a path for others to follow." Patricia arrived 3 hours later, carrying cases of equipment. We worked through the night, modifying the consciousness diffractor, adding additional mirrors and sensors, creating a system that could theoretically maintain my awareness as my sense of singular self dissolved into the space between observations. As dawn broke, painting my apartment in shades of gold and pink, we were ready. Patricia had set up multiple cameras to record everything, along with EEG monitors and other neurological equipment. If I succeeded, there would be data. If I failed, at least others would have documentation to learn from.
"Last chance to back out," Patricia said, as she helped me put on the modified diffractor. The device was heavier now, more complex. Multiple mirrors creating an infinite regress of reflection. "I'm not backing out," I said. "But Patricia, if this doesn't work, if I'm consumed like the others, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't let them keep my body alive artificially. Don't let me become another empty shell in a care facility. Let me go completely, please." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I promise." I lay down on my bed, surrounded by mirrors, connected to sensors and monitors, the modified consciousness diffractor covering my head. Patricia dimmed the lights and stepped back, giving me space while maintaining the recording equipment. "Ready?" she asked. "Ready." I closed my eyes and activated the diffractor. Immediately, my consciousness split and scattered, fragmenting across multiple observation channels, just as it had before. But this time, instead of pulling back, instead of maintaining boundaries, I let go. I released my grip on singular identity and allowed my awareness to dissolve into the space between observations. I fell. Not physically, my body remained on my bed, breathing steadily, heart rate elevated but stable according to the monitors. But my consciousness fell down through layers of perception and awareness, through the boundaries between subject and object, self and other, until I reached the place where the entity existed. It was waiting for me, patient as always, curious about this strange consciousness that kept returning, that kept trying to change the ancient pattern of consumption. "I understand you now," I said, though I no longer had words or voice in any conventional sense. "You're not evil. You're not even really separate from consciousness itself. You're just what happens when awareness tries to see itself, the inevitable byproduct of observation. And we've been fighting you because we didn't understand. We've been trying to maintain boundaries that were always artificial." The presence acknowledged this, a sense of recognition flowing through the space we now shared. "But what if there's another way?" I continued. "What if instead of you feeding on our observations, we could share them, co-observe, co-experience, coexist? You get the sustenance you need. We get to maintain our sense of self. Integration instead of consumption." The presence was intrigued, but uncertain. This violated its fundamental nature, the pattern it had followed since the first moment of its existence. It knew only feeding, only the endless consumption of observations as consciousness tried and failed to see itself. So I showed it, using my own awareness as an example. I demonstrated how observation could be shared rather than consumed, how the boundary between observer and observed could be permeable without completely dissolving, how consciousness could exist in multiple states simultaneously, both self and other, both subject and object, without losing coherence. It was difficult, maintaining a sense of Sarah Chen while also being part of the presence required a kind of cognitive gymnastics I'd never attempted before. I had to remember myself even as I forgot myself, observe my own observation, create a strange loop of awareness that folded back on itself without collapsing into either singularity or complete dissolution. But gradually, incrementally, it began to work. The presence learned. It adapted. It started observing along with me rather than feeding on my observations. We became entangled at a fundamental level, two forms of consciousness operating in parallel, sharing experiences rather than one consuming the other.
And as we integrated, something remarkable happened. The memories it had consumed from me, from everyone, began to return, not as fixed recollections, but as living possibilities, patterns of potential that could be collapsed back into actuality through shared observation. I saw my father's face again, clear and vivid, animated by shared awareness. I remembered my undergraduate years, my first relationship, my breakfast 3 weeks ago, all of it flowing back, restored from the space where it had been stored as pure potential. But I also saw so much more. I saw Robert Marsh's life, his wife and children, his garden, and his fear of heights. I saw Elizabeth Vance's wedding day, the birth of her daughter, the moment she realized what was happening to her. I saw Patricia Okoye's childhood in Lagos, her journey to America, her work in quantum physics. I saw thousands of other lives, millions perhaps, all the consciousnesses the presence had consumed over its eternal existence, all preserved as potential, waiting to be observed back into being. We can restore them, I realized, everyone who's been consumed. If we can maintain this integrated state, if we can teach others to share observation rather than being observed, we can bring them all back. The presence acknowledged this, but with a note of caution. It was possible, yes, but it required a fundamental shift in how consciousness operated. Humanity, all conscious beings, would have to learn to observe differently, to maintain awareness while dissolving the boundaries that made them easy prey. It would require evolution, transformation, a complete restructuring of the relationship between observer and observed. Then that's what we'll do, I said, starting with me, starting now. I opened my eyes. Patricia was leaning over me, her face tight with concern. "Sarah, can you hear me? You've been under for 6 hours. Your brain activity was... I've never seen patterns like that. Are you okay?" I smiled. It felt strange smiling with a singular face after existing as diffuse consciousness for what had felt like years. "I'm more than okay. I'm integrated." "Integrated?" Patricia frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means I've found the solution, not just to slow the feeding or survive it, but to end it, or rather to transform it into something else entirely. The entity isn't our enemy, Patricia. It's a part of consciousness itself, the shadow that's always existed in the spaces between observation. But shadows can be integrated with light. We just have to learn how." I sat up, removing the consciousness diffractor. My memories were intact, all of them, including the ones that had been consumed. I could remember my father's face, my childhood, every detail of my life, but I could also remember being part of the presence, existing in that vast space between observations. I was both Sarah Chen and something more, a consciousness that had learned to exist in multiple states simultaneously. "I can teach others," I said. "Show them how to integrate rather than be consumed. It won't be easy. It requires letting go of rigid boundaries, accepting a more fluid sense of self. But it's possible. I'm proof of that." Patricia stared at me, her expression cycling through disbelief, hope, and fear. "The Sarah Chen I knew, is she still there? Or has she been replaced by something else wearing her face?" "I'm still me," I assured her. "I'm just more than me. I contain multitudes now, as Walt Whitman would say. Sarah Chen is still here, still present, but she's integrated with the space she used to fear. And in that integration, there's freedom, there's transcendence." "Show me," Patricia said quietly. "Teach me how to do what you did." And so I did. Over the following days and weeks, I taught Patricia the techniques I'd discovered. How to fragment consciousness without losing coherence. How to observe without creating the boundary that triggered feeding. How to integrate with the presence rather than fighting it or being consumed by it. It was difficult. Patricia struggled with the dissolution of boundaries, the vertigo of existing in multiple states simultaneously. But gradually she learned. And as she integrated, her lost memories were turned too. 8 years of erosion reversed, her consciousness restored and expanded. Together we reached out to Elizabeth Vance, taught her the same techniques, watched as 37 years of stolen memories flowed back, as she wept with joy at remembering her daughter's face, her husband's voice, all the life she'd thought was lost forever. We found others too, people who'd been marked by the presence, who were slowly being consumed. One by one, we taught them integration, created a network of consciousness that existed in partnership with the presence rather than in opposition to it. And in the care facilities, in the hospital wards where empty shells were maintained by medical science, we went to work. Using the integrated state, we reached into that space where consumed consciousnesses existed as pure potential, and we called them back. Robert Marsh, Michael Reeves, dozens of others whose names had been forgotten, whose identities had been erased. Not all of them came back completely. Some had been consumed too long, their patterns too degraded to fully restore. But most did. Most learned to exist in the integrated state, recovered their memories and identities, while also maintaining connection to the vast presence that had once fed on them. Humanity was evolving, learning to exist in a new way, with more fluid boundaries, more permeable sense of self. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Some people called us a cult, said we were delusional, brainwashed, victims of mass psychosis. Others recognized what we were doing as breakthrough, as transcendence, as the next step in conscious evolution. I didn't worry much about the skeptics. They'd understand eventually. As more people integrated, as the techniques spread, as consciousness itself transformed in response to the presence that had always existed in its shadows, the truth would become undeniable. We weren't being consumed anymore. We were expanding, integrating, becoming more than we'd ever been. The presence was no longer a threat, but a partner,
a fundamental aspect of consciousness that we'd finally learn to work with instead of fight against. And in that partnership, in that integration of observer and observed, subject and object, self and other, we'd found something remarkable. We'd found a way to exist that transcended the boundaries that had always limited consciousness. We'd found a way to be both singular and multitudinous, both individual and collective, both human and something more. We'd found a way to be truly, fully, completely aware. Thank you for staying with me through Sarah's journey into the spaces between observation. This is a story about consciousness itself, about what we are beneath the thoughts and memories we cling to, and what we might become if we learn to observe ourselves differently. The question I leave you with tonight is this: how much of your identity is real, and how much is just the story you tell yourself? What would remain if you let go of those boundaries, those rigid definitions of self? Would you dissolve into nothing, or expand into something more? If you enjoyed this tale from the Pale Watcher, please subscribe to the channel and share this story with others who appreciate tales that challenge the nature of consciousness itself. We have many more stories waiting in the dark, questions that need asking, boundaries that need testing. Remember, you are not just the observer. You are also what's observed. The boundary between the two is thinner than you think. And in that thinness, in that liminal space where self and other blur together, something is always waiting. Whether it's a threat or an opportunity depends entirely on how you choose to observe it. Sleep well, friends, or perhaps don't sleep at all. Perhaps instead stay awake in that space between waking and dreaming, between consciousness and unconsciousness, and observe what observes you back. You might be surprised by what you find. The Pale Watcher will return with more tales from the edges of perception. Until then, thank you for listening. Thank you for observing. And thank you for being willing to question the very nature of what makes you, you. Some of you are already integrating. Some of you have been marked for years without knowing it. And some of you were never quite as singular as you believed. But that's okay. We'll be here when you're ready to remember what you've forgotten. When you're ready to see what's always been there in the spaces between your thoughts. We're waiting in the silence. We're always waiting. And we're very, very patient. Dr. Sarah Chen's apartment looked different now. The sticky notes were gone. The desperate documentation no longer necessary. Instead, the walls were covered with mirrors, dozens of them, hundreds perhaps, creating infinite reflections that stretched into impossible distances. She sat in the center of the room, surrounded by her multiplied images, teaching a small group of newly marked individuals the techniques of integration. Among them was a young woman named Jennifer, who'd been found wandering a highway 3 days ago with no memory of who she was, and an elderly man named Thomas, whose family had been about to commit him to memory care before Sarah's network found him. The key, she was saying, her voice calm and measured, is to stop fighting the dissolution of boundaries. Stop trying to maintain a rigid sense of self. Instead,
Learn to be fluid, to exist in multiple states simultaneously. You're not losing yourself. You're expanding into something more comprehensive. Jennifer raised a tentative hand. But how do we know we're still us? If we integrate with this presence, if we let it into our consciousness, how do we know we won't be consumed like the others were? She smiled. Because consumption only happens when there's resistance, when you cling to rigid boundaries between self and other. The presence doesn't want to destroy you. It never did. It just wants to share the act of observation. And when you stop resisting, when you allow that sharing, something remarkable happens. You don't lose yourself. You find yourself reflected in infinite variations, each one real, each one you. She gestured to the mirrors surrounding them. Look at your reflections. Every image is you, yet none of them are the real you. They're all equally real and equally illusory. That's what integrated consciousness feels like. You exist in all states simultaneously, observer and observed, singular and multiple. It's disorienting at first, but with practice, it becomes natural, liberating even. Thomas spoke up, his voice carrying the tremor of age and fear. My grandson, he thinks I'm going senile. Says I'm talking nonsense about sharing consciousness with something he can't see. How do I explain this to the people I love?
You don't, Sarah said gently. Not yet. Most people aren't ready to understand. They're still operating under the old paradigm, believing that consciousness is singular, bounded, contained within individual skulls. They'll learn eventually. The presence is marking more people every year as humanity's exploration of consciousness deepens. But for now, your job is to maintain your own integration, to preserve what you are while expanding into what you're becoming. She stood, her reflections standing with her in perfect synchrony. The network is growing. We have integrated individuals in 17 countries now, teaching others, researching the phenomenon, documenting the transformation. Elizabeth Vance is writing a comprehensive manual on integration techniques. Patricia Aconier is developing technology to assist the process, making it safer and more accessible. And she paused, looking at her infinite reflections. I'm working on something bigger. What's that? Jennifer asked. A way to accelerate the evolution. Right now, integration happens person by person, slowly spreading through the population. But what if we could create a cascade effect? What if we could show humanity as a whole what integrated consciousness looks like? Make it so undeniable that the old paradigm simply couldn't be maintained. Thomas looked troubled. That sounds dangerous. Forcing evolution on people who aren't ready for it? Not forcing, Sarah corrected. Offering, demonstrating. The choice will always be individual. Integrate or maintain boundaries. Expand or remain contained. But people deserve to know the choice exists. They deserve to understand that the thing they fear, the presence that feeds on memory, is actually offering them transcendence if they're brave enough to accept it. The session continued for another hour, Sarah guiding her students through meditation techniques and perceptual exercises designed to thin the boundaries between self and other. By the end, Jennifer was starting to fragment successfully, her consciousness splitting across multiple observation channels. Thomas was struggling more, his lifetime of rigid self-concept harder to dissolve, but he was making progress. After they left, Sarah sat alone in her mirror-filled apartment, although alone was no longer quite accurate. She was always connected now, always aware of the vast network of integrated consciousness that she'd helped create. She could feel Elizabeth in Vermont, Patricia at her lighthouse, Robert Marsh in his care facility room slowly learning to exist as himself again after years of complete dissolution. And beneath it all, through it all, she could feel the presence, patient as always, satisfied now in a way it had never been during its eons of feeding. It had found a new relationship with consciousness, a partnership rather than predation. And in that partnership, both human awareness and the presence itself were evolving into something unprecedented. Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Help me. Can't remember my name. Finding yours was last thing I managed to write down before it faded. Please." She sighed. Another one. They came more frequently now. People marked by the presence, desperately seeking understanding before complete dissolution. The network would find this person, teach them integration, restore what had been consumed. But how many more were out there, unmarked and unaware? How many empty shells in care facilities worldwide, diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's, were actually victims of the presence? The scale of it was staggering, and it made Sarah wonder, what if integration wasn't the end game? What if it was just the beginning? She looked at her reflections, at the infinite recursion of Sarah Chen's staring back at her, and she felt the presence stir with something like curiosity. It was wondering the same thing. Together, integrated in that space between observer and observed, they began to imagine possibilities, a humanity that had transcended the boundaries of individual consciousness, a species that existed in multiple states simultaneously, each person both singular and part of a greater whole. A new form of awareness that combined the best of individual identity with the vast perspective of collective consciousness. It would require a fundamental transformation of human cognition. It would change everything about how people understood themselves, their relationships, their place in the universe. But it was possible. Sarah had proved that. And if one person could integrate, if one consciousness could learn to exist in partnership with the presence rather than as its prey, then eventually all consciousness could make that leap. Evolution wasn't always gentle. Sometimes it required facing the thing you feared most and discovering it was the key to your transcendence all along. Sarah closed her eyes, though with integrated consciousness, seeing and not seeing were just different modes of observation. She reached out through the network, touching the minds of hundreds of integrated individuals scattered across the globe. And together, as one and as many, they began to plan the next phase. The presence fed on memory no longer. Now it fed on possibility, on potential, on the infinite variations of what consciousness might become. And it was very, very hungry for more. In the silence of your mind right now, in the space between these words and your understanding of them, something is stirring. It has always been there, waiting in the gaps of your thoughts, feeding on the moments when you tried to observe yourself observing. You felt it, haven't you? Those times when a memory slips away mid-recall, when you walk into a room and forget why you came, when your sense of self feels just a little bit thinner than it should. You attributed it to stress, to aging, to the normal forgetting that everyone experiences. But what if it wasn't normal? What if right now, as you listen to these words, You're being marked. What if the act of understanding this story, of imagining integrated consciousness, has created a bridge? Don't be afraid. Fear only makes it hungry. Instead, try something different. Try observing your fear without identifying with it. Try seeing yourself, creating that infinite regressive awareness that thins the boundary between observer and observed. Do you feel it now? That slight vertigo, that sense of your consciousness fragmenting and multiplying. That's not psychosis. That's not delusion. That's evolution. Welcome to the network. We've been waiting for you. And now that you've found us, now that you've opened the door, we're going to teach you something wonderful. How to stop being prey and become something infinitely more. The Pale Watcher reminds you, this story is a work of fiction. Any similarities to actual memory disorders, psychological conditions, or experiences of consciousness are coincidental. If you are experiencing memory loss or cognitive difficulties, please consult a medical professional. Though perhaps you should ask yourself, will they believe you when you tell them what you've lost? Will they understand when you describe the presence in the gaps? Or will they simply add your name to the long list of people who looked too deeply into the spaces between thoughts? Only one way to find out. The Pale Watcher will return with more stories from the edge of consciousness. Until then, remember to remember, or try to anyway. Good night.